following on from this flower that I painted from my garden, I just wanted to talk to you about how we could create a background for this flower. And with that, I'm going to use just the general help of my color wheel. So if I wanted it to look dynamic, and as it does in nature, opposites are often in play. So we've got an orangey peach here, and we've got green foliage. The foliage is quite dark compared to, say, a light green that you can see in the grass downstairs. So that's quite a good colour combination for the flower to stand out. If I didn't want the flower to stand out, I would use, can you see that the colouring of the flower sits in this area here? So if I wanted it to stand out, the foliage I would use would be on the other side of the colour wheel. So the greens that I use might be from this green to this green into blue. If I wanted it to be quite soft and subtle, I might pull into this green a little bit, but go more into the centre, which means I'm working with a greenish brown. Brown is a tertiary colour. It sits in between every opposite, red and green, orange and blue, yellow and purple. So I want to make this stand out. I'm going to use the opposite on my colour wheel, which is the greens, the bluey greens. So first of all, I have to decide, do I want a focused background or do I want a blurry background? Well, I actually want to do a very blurry background. So that means carefully wetting everything but my flower. And then that way, I'll just start off here and show you. I'm not sure if at this angle you can see the water, but I've got a very wet brush and I'm laying down very flatly a lot of moisture onto the page. Remember the rule that wet on dry, wherever you put the water, that makes like the border of that country. The water, the colour's not going to run outside of where you have placed water on the paper, so it won't run into your existing flower. That's probably enough for me to get started so I can show you what I'm talking about. I basically want to use, say, soft ultramarine blue in little bits, dribs and drabs here. I'm going into a deeper green here. I'm just going to rub that down because I want to mix it in with my even darker green. Yeah. So what I'm doing is, again, I'm sort of rubbing along the paper. It's up to you whether you want to indicate leaf kind of shapes. Because I'm using wet on wet, everything I put down is going to become blurred, and that means soft and out of focus. So that means the focus remains on my flower, which is my desire. If I painted everything in this same colour of dark green, it would all look too much the same. So I'm going to throw in some greenish blue. It's got a little bit of a sort of aqua in it, and even this, which is more of a bluey teal colour. Just add more water. I like that colour reaction between the orange of the petal and this bluey green colour. I like that. Sorry, I don't trust my not so neat hand, so a bit of support from the other one. And then I'm happy enough to throw in some nice vibrant green in there as well. It's up to you how detailed you want to go as well, whether you really don't like or don't mind these little white bits that are left. I don't mind them. I guess I've had too many years of having to be so perfect with my artwork for clients that a little bit of hit and miss makes me feel free. And also, if you have a wet brush, there's nothing wrong with doing like dry on dry. So that means, see here, I'm pushing the paint around. It's not moving anywhere without my force. So that means my brush is damp, but the paper's not wet, and my brush isn't really wet, so the colour I'm adding on is not really running. And that's basically it. Because this is still moist, I can add in, if I wanted to go maybe a bit of purple, like who knows, there might be another flower there. You know, I can add things in as I please. If it's all getting too pretty, I can add in a deep, like a Payne's grey, which is a bluish sort of black, and I can darken things down so that the vibrance of the colour on the paper is not these aqua colours in the background, but just the orange of the leaves. So adding a Payne's grey, which is a nice bluish black, is going to do that. You don't want to add black because it just becomes a bit of a void and doesn't have too much character to reflect. I'm not anti-black, but I've not really ever been in painting situations where black has been the best answer. So I really happily get by with my Payne's grey. Or you can add a bit of brown to your Payne's grey. That gives you a lovely dark colour as well that's not so bluish. Obviously, the brown's negating the blue. And remember, blue and orange are opposites on the colour wheel, so even though this is a deep blue, it's giving me a lovely reaction to the colour. And then you want the tonal contrast, so that's why I'm going quite dark, because the leaf itself is quite light. The darker my background is, again, the more I'll pop the leaf forward of the background. If you get into a situation like this where it's a harder edge, wet your brush and simply, or even drop water, you'll get those beautiful cauliflower runs, which I love. Some people don't like, but I love. And then just continue on around the flower, popping in bits of colour here and there as you see fit. As I progress, you'll see I'll have a slightly lighter side up here where I want to have the weight of darker tones and colours down the bottom, base, sort of the base part of it, grounding the image. Another important thing, I don't rip the pages out because I'm keeping the book, I'm using the book, but if I were you and I were painting this, I wouldn't have my page stuck on my book. I would be able to turn it around. Remember, I've said in a previous lesson, it really does help with your comfort of your paintbrush hand to be in a certain position. It's just more comfortable for you, which means you'll naturally have more control over your work. And if you want to keep extending that out, I would just maintain that that stays quite wet. You don't have to add colour at this stage, but if you keep it wet, then it's going to allow you to fill that out later all the way. And any lines you see, hard lines that perhaps may be forming, you know, they need to be kept damp and wet as well. The more you use this technique, the more confident you will become in adding in stronger bits of colour. I'm going to throw a little bit of brown in here purely because I'm worried that the blue is just going to take over and make everything look too blue. So I'm just using the Derwent brown, and as I said before, I'm mixing it in with the Payne's grey just for a little bit of variation, to be honest. It's taking the prettiness out of the blue. And keep turning that, or I'm switching over. I should be using a bigger brush. There's a pretty blue. I'll take that all over this way. I'm really throwing this wet paint down just because I don't want lines to form, and then I'm going to come back in with my very random but I guess similar to the foliage shapes. And here's the benefit of rotating that page, because this is the natural curve of my hand and it's now on a very good line with that petal. So it's sort of the easiest way for my hand to make that mark. Because I've had a really dark area there, I don't mind if it gets a little bit lighter here, even though it's considerably darker than the petal. It's going quite a bit lighter than the flower, than the shadow before. Whoopsie, that's going to happen. Now, if I really didn't want that, I'll show you what to do. Get a really small brush, get a little bit of paper towel, rub very gently on it and press. Now, I might lift the colour a little bit, that's okay because we know what colour that is. See how I'm rubbing flat? I've got the heel of the bristle, so where the metal ends and the bristle starts, I'm literally rubbing that. And I'm not patting everything up, I'm just patting where I'm taking it up. Now I've got a little bit of the orange on my brush. I'm just going to throw that back in there. And I'd probably do that later, but I'll show you now because of the video. Yeah, see here how I've left it quite sharp? Not sharp, but it's a harder edge than the rest. I don't mind that, because what that does is it makes your brain think, oh, it's not that blurry, so it's not that far down below the leaf. So degrees of blurriness, especially in foliage, it's quite useful. You can tell the viewer exactly how close that leaf is compared to the really blurry one that might be, you know, right at the bottom of the pot. So that's a good thing to know as well. Nothing has to be set. I can literally wet around the edge of this, and yes, it will soften it, but it's not going to make it as soft as other areas. So when I start adding my lighter colour, it's still kind of holding its own shape. I'm just going to pop a few nice greens in here as well for variety. As I said before, if green is not your thing, you know, I could have thrown in a whole lot of burnt sienna like I'm doing here and made it a real khaki olive green. That would still work. That's the beauty of using blurriness. Your brain will actually fight for you to make up whatever colour you put down. If I had a whole lot of similar colours to this, my brain would go, oh, that's just more flowers, but they're all blurry. The genius of our thoughts and our brains are that unless you're a small child, you've had years of experience to identify things, and your brain goes into this, you know, identifying game where it sees a funny shape or a strange colour, and because it's close to something it can identify, then the brain uses that as a point of reference and goes, oh, that's the same colour. Oh, that must be another flower. Oh, that's dark greeny blue. Oh, leaves are dark greeny blue. That must be a leaf. So your brain is an incredible helper in watercolour, even though people say, oh, you've got to give yourself up to watercolour and just let things happen. It's because of the joy of your brain working that way that, you know, we can allow these things to just sit on the paper and work their wonder. Otherwise, everything would just look extremely abstract. Even not putting things on evenly, like if I dab, you know, if I dab this ultramarine on quite unevenly, my brain's still going to make up. It could be dappled light, it could be a bit of shadow. So just to prove a point, I'm going to make some similar shapes here in the other colour. And I'm just going to put the blue around it, blur it right off straight away. If your brain's anything like mine, it's just told me that that's another flower further away. If you're new to watercolor, even if you're not new, if you're just lacking a bit of confidence, this is a really, really good example to do, purely because you don't have to go to so much detail with this flower. It can just be a pansy or a little flat yellow colour. It doesn't have to have all this movement and gradation in the petals. Try any flat, flowery looking shape, but have fun with this background. Give yourself time for this flower to dry though. I normally, you know, if I was doing it for a job, I might even hit it with the hairdryer to speed up the drying time, but just allow it to dry and then figure out how you want your background to go. Like, do you want to have blue on one corner? I might put a lot of blue on this side because I don't want it to look similar all the way around. So now I'm just putting like really watery paint down. Not much colour at all now, with just a little hint of yellowy green. And I'm just going to wet this corner. And I think I'll go just blue. I'm purposefully using a more sun sky blue than the ultramarine down this bottom end, because remember, ultramarine tells the brain it's cool and it's shadowy, whereas up here I want it to feel sunny and vibrant. And now I'm just poking into my lemony yellow for a few little indicators of petals. And you know what? I think I'll leave it at that.